Hello, and welcome to 472 Main Street. I'm Steve Ledoux, Town Manager here in Acton, and 472 Main Street is a show about some of the people and issues that are focusing on Acton, obviously. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of the major issues that will be before town meeting starting April 1st. And we're going to start off first with Bill Mullen, who is probably no stranger to a lot of the folks that are watching, but Bill is the chair of the Morrison Farm Implementation Committee, and we're going to be talking with Bill today about Morrison Farm, what the plans are, and what people can expect if and when, and I hopefully will see the implementation of this project move forward. So welcome, Bill. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Steve.
I know a lot of people know who you are, but maybe you could tell us a little about your background, how you got involved in town government. I know you've been involved in government for a long time, and if you just talk a little about your background for a little bit.
Great. I hope people haven't noticed my picture on the post office wall. So, yeah, I've been involved in government for a long time, and my family started at. My father was a selectman in the nearby town, and I was a selectman for a couple terms. Actually, my interest goes way back to the 70s, where I actually served as a state representative representing Acton and Boxborough for one term. That was when I was very young.
You were one of the youngest legislators ever, weren't you?
Yes, I was 5 years old when I was. I was elected when I was 20, and so then served one term and then went off to do other things. But you know, basically in Acton, I've been on the Finance Committee and then 2 terms as selectman. Back on the Finance Committee for I think the last 6 or so years. But Morrison Farm is something that I've been working on for a very long time. I think it's something of interest to the community, and we started in 1997 working on it, and it's been a passion of mine to try to preserve open space, work to enhance historical assets, and give people recreational opportunities. It's all rolled into one. So. It's interesting that the time I've spent in government has done many things, but this is something that's very, very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, you know, since I've been here for the last 5 years, you've certainly been a major catalyst for a lot of projects. I mean, I know NARA predated me, but you know, clearly the Lower Fields project over the high school, you were the big mover and shaker on that. So why Morrison Farm, and why now? Why are we discussing this?
Well, Morrison Farm is a jewel of a piece of land. It's in Acton's core. It's on Concord Road, which is and sort of a third of the way off of Route 2A and 2/3 from the town center. It abuts some magnificent town-owned property. The Woodlawn Cemetery is right next to it, on the left-hand side, if you will. And on the right-hand side is Ice House Pond, and then just beyond that is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. There's about 16 acres of forested land at the back that has trails that are beautiful to walk through. And then there's 16 acres of front land, which has a meadow, and there's organic gardens. And we bought this land in 1997 under a life tenancy to the owner at the time, Mrs. Morrison, who lived at the farm. And we got control of the property in 2003, and we've been working on it ever since. But for years, people have recognized it as a jewel in the town of Acton that needs to be preserved and needs to be used and understood.
Okay. What are the major goals as you see them for the Morrison Farm?
Sure. Well, it's a beautiful piece of land, and as I say, and we bought it to use it. You know, sometimes we'll buy a piece of land that we want to simply put aside as open space, and that's going to be it. In the case of Morrison Farm, we bought it as general and municipal land so that we could implement it. People always have wanted to look at the meadows and walk through the forests and perhaps even fish in the pond or kayak. So what we've talked about in this particular case is it has many elements, and some of which I've just touched on. But it has all of these different parts, and we're trying to bring it in cohesively and create something we're calling a living history park. Mm-hmm. So, for example, around Ice House Pond, we're going to be building a trail that's ADA or handicapped compatible, and that's going to connect over a bridge that we'll need to build to connect to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. So we'll have a loop that goes around Ice House Pond. That's a recreational element, but it's obviously something that makes the pond more useful. And a couple of other aspects involved historical assets. We think of this in terms of 4 centuries. That farm has been in farming since the mid-1600s. So if you think about it, 1675, it's a colonial farm. 1775, it's the American Revolution. 1875, it's the Industrial Revolution. 1975, the rebirth of patriotism. And all of those elements are captured in this plan and integrated into a whole that makes it a park that a lot of people can use.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, what makes it very exciting, because it has so many different aspects to it that I think will, you know, as you say, could really, really be a very important gem for the town.
Just as an example, Steve, is the Robbins homestead. You know, in 1775, on April 19, 1775, a rider came up after being in Concord. Some say it's Dr. Samuel Prescott, but we're not sure that it is. And he came up to a home that was there at the site, at the Robbins site, and the word is he took a cane or stick and banged on the side of the house 3 times to wake up Captain Robbins. And the stone is out there that says this: the regulars are coming, the regulars are coming. And Captain Robbins steps out of his house and he fires a musket 3 times in the air. And Isaac Davis and others picked up that sign. That's the first internet. That's how they communicated. And on that day, the Acton Minutemen, as we all know, marched to Concord, Isaac Davis at the head of it, and shot the herd around the world. Isaac Davis did not come back alive, but the Acton part of the dawn of our revolution is a very vital one. As everybody knows, is that the Battle of Lexington was conquered by Acton men.
That's
so,
right. That's right, exactly.
But we need to make people more aware of that site. And there's a cellar hole there. There's something called the Alarm Stone that memorializes that event. And so this is just one little piece of what we're trying to do.
Obviously, we'll be looking for some appropriation for this project at town meeting. So what are the associated costs, and how do you see this project getting funded?
Sure. We bought the land at a cheap price because in the mid-90s, because we gave the life tenancy. So the great news is this 32 acres of land we've got inexpensively, and frankly, it's taken a long time. We've actually paid off those bonds, so that's good that the the land is essentially coming into it. That's probably worth about $3 or $4 million at today's price. But for the project itself, it's got these various elements, and fortunately, the great majority of them, the vast majority of them, are eligible to be financed by Community Preservation Act funds. The total, we're going to also bond this because it has, it's a long-term asset, and so we always like to match our assets and liabilities, just like we do with our homes. When we buy a home, we don't pay cash; we buy it over time. So the total amount is of all of the elements that we're talking about is about $2.8 million, and we're going to be able to bond, I think, about $2.4 million of it. So from a cash flow standpoint, it's about $190,000 a year for 15 years, which is a very reasonable amount of money given what we're trying to do. And this will make this something that, I certainly hope is that 100 years from now people will still be using. Of course, you and I will be long gone. Well, you might be, but but people will look back and they'll be using it, and they won't know who did this, But it's something that I think of with anticipation and hope and pride, that we will have taken the effort to create something, preserve this land for a very long time, enhance the historical assets, and 100 years from now, people will be using it and they'll be enjoying it, and we will have done our duty, from my perspective.
So the part of the project that's not funded by CPA, you and your group are kind of looking at donations, gifts, and that type of thing.
Yes. Yeah. So far, we have something called the Friends of Morrison Farm, Inc., which is a separate 501c3, as opposed to the Morrison Farm Committee. And we've been able to raise some money so far to pay for some architectural and land survey costs and some archaeological survey expenses. And we hope we have a pledge of another $100,000 that if it gets approved, then it'll be funded. And so there'll be, the project will be augmented by private donations. Yeah.
So assuming we have a successful town meeting approves this project, what is the timetable for implementation?
Well, there's always government law, as you know, and specifically around the procurement levels for Chapter 30B, I think it's called.
30B,
and,
right.
And so we'll have to follow those protocols. But my hope would be that if you can envision it, it's summer solstice of 2014. I happened to be out there last year on the summer solstice about 8:30, and the sun was golden as the gardeners were out there, and on the meadow was shining, and it was just magnificent. But I can envision having a grand opening of the Morrison Nature and History Center, which will be a community gathering space there, and on that day. And so if you back off from those dates, you know, any type of construction or project management schedule, you have to say, what do you want to do in terms of the delivery date, and then back off. So I think that's a doable schedule. Things will have to click right along because there are a number of the procurement elements that we might have to put in the 30-day time frames for bidding and assessment. But the other good part about it is most of the work can go, of these elements can go in parallel. They're almost, really none of them are sequential, so we can do most of them in parallel. So it's a doable schedule.
We had quite a lengthy discussion with the selectmen this past Monday night, February 25th. A lot of it focused on whether the existing barn should be preserved or not. It seems that the selectmen were kind of siding with you and your committee in terms of removing the barn for the community gathering space. You know, clearly there are some historic preservationists that, you know, don't share that vision. How do you think the new gathering space will help address some of their concerns, or how are you going to address some of their concerns?
All right. Well, I think all of us, when we started, everybody, when we began, wanted to see this as a place that people could use, as opposed to put aside. You know, it's not a. This is not a museum piece. This is something, a piece of land that's supposed to be used for all ages and all generations and future generations. And you know, certainly, I thought that we might be able to use the house as a basic space to go to the bathroom, to, you know, have a meal or little small gatherings, and that the barn might be something that we have a larger gathering space. That was 1997. Over the period of time, the simple fact is that the house is too small for a useful purpose, for a public purpose. It's only 750 square feet on the ground floor, and to make it ADA accessible, you'd put these, you know, ramps that would have to go around and make it look absurd, in my view, and I don't think anybody really wants that. The barn itself is okay. It's a Depression-era barn. All of us would like to have saved it, but it's not usable for public purposes. It is in several reports, the so-called Kelleher report, which is a structural engineer and civil engineers have looked at it, and basically said that if you're going to use this for public purposes, then you can't, you know, reasonably without a cost that is kind of absurd. So unfortunately, we're going to have to take the barn down. It's not salvageable. And on that space, though, we've come up with, I think, a very good plan that was generated by the community gardeners as one of the main thrusts of this, is to put the new community gathering space, make the new one look similar to the one that is there, the barn, and in the same relationship. One of the important things about historical preservation is that when people put things in certain places, there's a reason for that, and so if you can replicate that or save it, those are important things to do. So right now you have the house, and you have the barn. The new building would be in that same relationship. You know, sometimes I think instead of calling this Morrison Farm, we should call it "You Can't Please All of the People All of the Time" Farm. And you know, whenever you try to do something that's exciting and different, sometimes you're not going to make everybody happy. But I'm pleased that the Board of Selectmen have supported it. The Morrison Farm Committee has endorsed it. You know, the Recreation Commission is in favor of it. The Historical Commission has sent us a couple of letters in support. So the boards in town are very much in favor, and we have a lot of other public support. But we're going to try to do everything we can to make this an asset that reflects the history that I talked about, the 4 centuries of history. And if we could preserve the barn in a meaningful way that allows the public access, we would. But we cannot in a reasonable, common sense way.
Okay, great. You know, clearly, as you've mentioned, you know, the vision is for this to be enjoyed by, you know, a lot of future generations of the town. When all the dust is settled, when all the, we're kind of in the weeds of this project right now, designing the project, how do you see Morris in 25 years from now? How do you think it's going to be utilized, and how do you think the public's going to appreciate it?
Right. Well, hopefully, I think of it in terms of, say, some of the decisions that were made by Frederick Law Olmsted in Boston about creating the Emerald Necklace. If you jog on the Charles River, or you go connect all the way to Franklin Park, the public gardens, nobody really thinks about how that was done. And so in one sense, I hope that people are just enjoying it. But similarly to that, and also to the Minuteman National Park, which Concord, I've lived around here a long time, and I remember when there were all kinds of houses down there, and Buttrick's ice cream stand was there, and all of that has changed. And now when you go there, you truly get a sense that this was a colonial era, and that there was a very important event that occurred there, which started our country. And I would like that same feeling here. That not that they think back to what we did or anything, but they come to this spot, they enjoy the nature of it, the incredible habitats that are there, stroll through the woods, perhaps walk or jog around the pond, and maybe even bike, and then become much more aware of the history that was there, the Robbins homestead, and the cellar hole and the alarm stone, but also the ice house. We'll make sure that people understand the size of the ice house, and put a kiosk up and explain what happened. And then finally, I know this is a little bit crazy, but I would like to, I've oftentimes thought of this as almost a slogan, that the Acton Freedom Trail begins here at Morrison Farm. And you just think about it, that truly that's where it did in 1775, as we talked about. That was the first notice in Acton of the regulars coming to Concord. And then you can see how we connect up to the center of town, the Davis Monument, which is a very special place in not only Acton's history, but our American history. You swing down Main Street, we have the magnificent Arboretum that is available for people. A little further down, you have the Isaac Davis home. You have the Hosmer House, which is where the Historical Society resides. And you can even connect down to other things, which are the Discovery Museum, Jones Tavern, the Faulkner House, and I see some of these all linking together. And so in 25 years, people will be coming and saying, let's go walk or ride the Acton Freedom Trail. And that would be a very exciting thing for me, and I think it's exciting for the townspeople. I mean,
that's great. I've just recently read a book, actually it's about the Chicago World's Fair in the late 1800s, but Olmsted was hired to do a lot of the landscape design, and he was frustrated because when he did the Emerald Necklace, for example, he had a big picture vision. He knew things weren't going to happen right away, that organically they'd have to develop. And it sounds like we're kind of talking about a similar notion here as well.
Was that Devil in the White City?
Devil in the White City, correct.
That was a great book.
Absolutely.
Eric Larson.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So these things evolve, and we've seen it at NARA. We started with a vision at NARA, and I remember. We were doing the architecturals. It was a little box. It was a rectangle. We didn't say what the building was. And that's what's going to happen here. We're going to vote the funds. We've done some conceptual drawings to make sure that we understand the costs. But ultimately, we'll go through a process of designing. The selectmen will put out an RFP, I presume, for architects. The architects will submit things. They will choose the architect. The architect will come back with ideas, and it will evolve. At NARA, it has, it's interesting, it has come out to be what I hoped it was, but much more, and in directions that I didn't know. It's exciting to have the Miracle Field at NARA, and it's exciting to have the volleyball area and the playgrounds and all of the stations that are there. So that wasn't what we thought about originally, but that's what's happened. And I see that happening here, too.
Exactly. And in fact, we just are receiving a state award from the Mass Parks Association for the design of the Miracle Field, so it's real kudos to everybody who was involved with that. One of the questions you have asked me a lot in your role of FinCom, and one of the great things about doing a show is I get to ask people same questions, and you've taught me a term, so I'm going to ask you, what is the value proposition of Morrison Farm?
Well, that's great. You didn't set me up, but I absolutely have it right here. Because this is a Morrison Farm leaflet that we've created, and it's the first thing we say. is when the question we ask is, why do we want to do this? And this is the Morrison Farm value proposition. It says, if we create a new living history park capturing the gifts of nature and the essence of Acton's 4 centuries of history at a cost of approximately $2.8 million, all people in Acton and our broader community will have a unique opportunity to experience nature, to actively and passively exercise, and to learn about our past, while forever preserving the Morrison Farm, Ice House Pond, East Acton Village Common, and the Captain Robbins Homestead site. So those have the elements. If we take this action at a certain cost, we'll have the results with an impact to our society of what we say. So that's the value proposition. I certainly think it is of value. We're not making any more land in this world, and I think we need to preserve it. And this plan preserves the land, allows people to use it, enhances the knowledge of the history of the area, provides many, many different recreational opportunities and programming opportunities, and so I think people will find it to be well worth the investment. So.
Absolutely. Sounds great. When this project's over, what's next for Bill Mullen?
Well, thank you. I think I better go back to work. This has been taking a lot of time. As you know, any volunteer effort takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. I think the most important thing is to see it through. As I'm a very bottom line oriented person, and when it's not done until it's done, and we're going to need votes at town meeting to approve this, and then there'll be an implementation phase. If the selectmen want to continue to have some advice or help from the Morrison Farm Committee, we'll see if we can do that. And then take it from there. There is one item on the agenda, which I'll bring up, which is we in the town of Acton need to get back the use of Nagog Pond. So, I can, as people know, it's not useful for passive recreation, and so that's going to be your job, I think. But I'd be happy to help. I'd love to see that area be open to passive recreation. It's used as a backup water supply for Concord. But I just keep on thinking that there's an opportunity there. If they ever really needed it for backup water supply, they could just say so. But in the meantime, if we could provide some access for canoeing, boating, things like that, passive, no motorized things in there, that would be magnificent. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, having worked with you on a bunch of things over the last 5 years is, you're amazing, because when you focus on something and you want something, you always get it. So,
well,
you don't let obstacles get in your way, and you get things done, which I think is a great quality. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I like to work with teams, and if that in a public environment, that's the only way you're going to be successful. In the case of Morrison Farm, this is a bottom-up type of thing. People wanted to make sure to preserve it. There's a lot of elements there, and that's why the Morrison Farm Committee itself has been tremendous. They're hard workers. They're people who know the town and have served in many different roles, and so I'm pretty good at just sort of getting the agendas together, and then a lot of folks are doing a lot of work, and that's what makes this very rewarding. And so it's the committee as well as myself. So
that's great. I'd like to thank you for being on. I think hopefully our viewers have learned a lot more about Morrison Farm and can get into a town meeting and be a little better educated. And once again, thanks for being on the show.
Can I mention one pitch? Is that
Absolutely.
on March 6th, I don't know when this is going to be running or has, we're going to have an open house. So this might have been, it might be running after that, but
It might
March
be.
6th is an open house at Town Hall. So in the evening about Morrison Farm.
Oh, very good. Hey, always like to have shameless plugs on our
Right.
show. Okay, well, I'd like to thank Bill once again, and after a short break, we'll be talking about the Kelly's Corner project. We'll be right back.
Captain Acton, our superhero, is searching the town for volunteers to fill several openings on town boards and committees. If you have any interest in volunteering, Acton would love your help. A complete list of the current volunteer opportunities, as well as an application form, can be found on the town website.
Welcome back, and welcome to 472 Main Street. The next part of the show, we'll be talking with Roland Bartle, the Planning Director for the Town of Acton, and we're going to be focusing on the request for funding for a plan for Kelly's Corner, and also talk a little about the 2020 plan for the town. So, Roland, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you coming on. I always like to have folks get a little, know a little about our guests and kind of why they got into what they're doing. So why don't you tell us a little about your background, how long you've been planning director for the town, and a few things like that.
Well, I started working for the town in 1987, became planning director in 1988, so my time with the town is 25 years plus some, and my background is I grew up in Germany, in Heidelberg, Germany. Went to university in Stuttgart at a small university called Hohenheim, and graduated in agronomy and environmental sciences. My wife, which I got to know in Germany, she was on a foreign exchange program. She was American, and so at the time when we met, we kept going back and forth quite a bit across the ocean, and in the end, once I was finished with my studies and got my degree, I came over here, and so it was a bit of a rough start, and lived in Boston. Barbara still went to school at the time, so I did a bunch of odd jobs. I did waiter at a Japanese restaurant, I worked in a construction yard, I worked at Polaroid as a file clerk, and eventually worked my way out to Western Mass, and dabbled around in environmental activism, with some land stewardship work, organic farming, and I observed that, wanting to go back into some professional work in the environmental field at the time, that a lot of, or all of the land management and land use decisions flow through the local level at somewhere. And that smart communities have established planning agencies. So there it was. And so I thought that would be the right place for me to participate in that process. And working for, and I also found that working for the public sector, working for the community interests, that fit for me philosophically. So in the end, I started working in Acton. I found a job here, and I ended up liking working with people and the politics too. So I discovered that along the way. So it ended up being a good fit, and I've enjoyed my work here ever since. So yes.
You became planning director in '88, but you came in '87. So what were you doing in '87?
I was basically in an assistant planner position. I was in charge of site plan reviews and those kinds of things. So yeah. So yep.
Very interesting. Talk a little about the Acton 2020 plan. What was the process? What were kind of the major components that were involved in the 2020 plan?
Yeah, we do. We went through Acton 2020 is the third comprehensive or master planning process for Acton that I've been involved in, and it basically was a 4-year process of what I would say unprecedented public outreach and participation in setting first a vision for the community. And when I say unprecedented, it wasn't just in numbers of people that participated, but we made a big effort in reaching out to different community groups, to ethnic groups in the community, all sorts of folks not that you don't normally see participating in town government affairs. You don't see a town meeting and so forth. So that was a big effort that we had never done before. So so it was a 4-year effort, and in the end, it culminated at town meeting in 2012 with the adoption of the goals and objectives. And I think we have a slide for the goals and objectives there. There are seven overall goals and objectives, and about 30 7 overarching goals and about 30 more detailed objectives. And under that, you find hundreds and hundreds of action items. But to summarize it all up, about a year before we came to the final product of the plan, the final, we reported it out, we ran through 3 scenarios for, policy scenarios for how to manage land use and future development in Acton. And the first one was, just keep everything the way it is. Don't change the zoning bylaw, don't change the subdivision, just leave everything the way it is. And then we played out the implications of that in terms of, build out the fiscal situation, what the fiscal impacts of that would be, playing some questions on, how sustainable is that? Sustainability is important for residents in Acton, and for all of us really. And the second scenario was just try to stop growth wherever we can. And the third scenario was, moving new development or redirecting new development into centers and preserving the open space instead of just letting development happen everywhere. After all those scenarios were played out, we got very strong public feedback that the third scenario that I just mentioned about moving development into centers was a big winner. And so you find in the documents the roadmap for Acton 2020, and that we have a slide on that too. And you see, on one side you see, guiding growth to centers, and on another side you see a bubble, preserve open space, and on the third bubble you see, promote or encourage employment-oriented economic development. And the chart is very, very complicated, has a lot of lines and graphs and bubbles in it, but it shows the interaction and the synergy and how this holistically, if we pursue these 3 major objectives, how these holistically would then promote fiscal and environmental sustainability in Acton. And that was really an eye-opener when we played through all of that and saw that the chart is complicated, but it's all explained in the text, and it's very compelling.
So, given all that, how has Kelly's Corner become a priority? And maybe before you answer that, it seems like we were at a Finance Committee meeting last night, and it might help the viewers to know what exactly, in the plan, how Kelly's Corner is defined. We did have one person last night that just viewed it was just that intersection, and clearly it's more than that. So, one, how do you define Kelly's Corner, and then why is it a priority?
All right. So Kelly's Corner is starts. Let me start out at that intersection. It's that intersection with the traffic signal of Main Street and Massachusetts Avenue. There's a gas station on the corner, and but Kelly's Corner as an area, as a district, as a zoning district, as a place in town, really extends from there to the beginning of the school campus and the entrance of the school campus. It takes in the entire property that Kmart sits on, goes across Main Street, and then basically follows parallel to Massachusetts Avenue all the way to Route 2. And there's all these commercial properties. There's
so even the Roach Brothers Plaza is considered.
And the Roach Brothers Plaza is considered part of Kelly's Corner, and Acton Medical on the north end is part of Kelly's Corner. So this entire business district, including some of the condominiums that are sitting at the edges of it, is considered Kelly's Corner. So, as I said, with Acton 2020, it was about moving development or redirecting new development that Acton would experience in the coming years, in the future, into centers. And throughout the process of Acton 2020, with the public interaction, Kelly's Corner kept bubbling up to the top. And it was, you know, yeah, we need to do something about Kelly's Corner. Kelly's Corner, it's the gateway to Acton, but it looks like our back door. You know, and geographically, it is at the geographic center of Acton. It is the crossroads of Acton. It has the school campus right next to it with all the activity. And so from an overall plan, the direction or the feedback we got from Acton residents was Kelly's Corner is the priority. If we're moving, if we're redirecting development into centers, then Kelly's Corner should be the first one to focus on. And that kind of makes sense too, because Kelly's Corner is the only one, well, South Acton has sewers too, but there are other constraints. Kelly's Corner has sewers. Kelly's Corner is close to transportation access. And Kelly's Corner is not, you know, and this is not meant to say negatively, but it doesn't have constraints that you would find in other Acton centers because of historic preservation concerns. So, you know, in terms of opportunities for redevelopment and creating something new is really wide open in Kelly's Corner. It takes imagination, it takes patience, and you know, it's not going to happen overnight. But I think folks, what we heard in Acton 2020 is people want us to work on setting the stage for a transformation.
You know, it's interesting because we've kind of talked about that, the same kind of concept with Morrison Farm with Bill Mullen just a little while ago, and I was telling Bill,
he's a visionary.
Yeah, but we were talking about Frederick Law Olmsted, and I had just recently read a book about, you know, he totally looked big picture. He realized that when he was planning the Emerald Necklace in Boston, that it would take, you know, 50 years for it to really look the way it did. So I think it's kind of some of that same concept applies to.
I definitely think that Kelly's Corner is, you know, if we go to Kelly's Corner now and we look what's there and we let ourselves be bound by what we see there, and then and sort of take that as constraint, then we've already lost the battle. And then we've already conceded to what is and to no opportunity for change. So I think it needs to be the bigger vision there, yes, absolutely.
So on April 1st, we're going to town meeting. Part of the recommended budget that the Selectmen have voted that I had recommended initially contains $277,000 in a capital article for Kelly's Corner. What will be accomplished with these funds, the $277,000?
Yeah, so I think we have a slide on this, and this was already conceived in the Acton 2020 plan, actually. So we would be working on three major parts in Kelly's Corner. One is the zoning regulations for Kelly's Corner. Right now, the zoning regulations are very restrictive. It's pretty much built out to what you see right now. There's not much opportunity for redevelopment. Then we would be working on design guidelines. Because zoning can't capture everything, but we can convey to developers and property owners other concepts through design guidelines. And then the third part is to work on the public infrastructure piece. You know, there are public roadways going through Kelly's Corner. They have it's a tired infrastructure. The sidewalks are not really suitable for creating any kind of town center. So that's the third piece, is to create preliminary, or, you know, Mass DOT calls it 25% plans for basically reworking the infrastructure. And how that would work, we would hire expert consultants. I would envision a team of consultants that works together as a team with us.
A kind of interdisciplinary type
An interdisciplinary approach, a holistic approach to the project. Look at it as you know, as a challenge and how we solve it, or how we go about it. I think public participation and outreach is huge. Look, there are, you know, there are all the stakeholders. There are, you know, the business owners, the business property owners. There are the immediate neighbors. There are the school campus and the students at the schools. And there is the entire town of Acton and all the residents who use Kelly's Corner for various different purposes. So these are all stakeholder groups, and they all want to have some say in it, and that needs to be brought together. And out of that, and there are professionals, believe it or not, who have expertise in how to run these public processes. Out of that, we hope to arrive at a preferred vision for Kelly's Corner. And from that vision flows, well, first of all, that vision needs to be informed by the existing conditions analysis, and the consultants would do that. And that includes the engineering analysis of what do we have on the ground. It includes environmental analysis, what are constraints. It includes the market analysis of what are the business market real estate opportunities in the foreseeable future, and what are the constraints. So we have some realistic, so we don't just do pipe dreams, you know, we want to be realistic, and that's an education process. We want to bring that piece of information to the public, and then let the public work with that in helping us basically develop an actionable preferred vision for Kelly's Corner. From that flow the zoning standards, from that would flow the design guidelines, and from that would flow the design standards for the public infrastructure improvements, because they need to support what the vision for Kelly's Corner is. And that's why it all needs to flow together. And it's an iterative process that constantly has feedback loops in it.
So when we talk about public infrastructure projects, Route 111, Mass Ave is a state road. 27, I think, state numbered, but town maintained. So how does the state get incorporated into this process, especially when we're talking about infrastructure improvements?
Yes, Mass Avenue and the intersection itself is controlled by Mass DOT. Route 27, it's a numbered highway, but it's a town road. So yes, there is coordination necessary. We have already reached out to Mass DOT. There's this District 3 in Worcester is where regionally or in charge for Acton. So we had already conversations there. They seem very excited about the project. They know that the roadways and the infrastructure in that area are old. They have budgetary constraints, and if they can see an initiative from a community that has the potential of bringing in additional funding, and we haven't really talked about that yet, has the potential of bringing in additional funding, then that gets them excited. They have signaled that they're willing to work with us through the process. That obviously whatever we do has to meet certain design standards based, you know, that Mass DOT has. But you know, those are no longer prohibitive. I mean, they're just as, if you look at their, you know, objectives statewide and all that, and what the guidelines are that are being laid out for Mass DOT. I mean, they're talking about bike lanes, they're talking about sidewalks, they're talking about you know, adequate pedestrian accommodations and crossings and all of those things. So there's no, I don't see a conflict there. They clearly don't want us to make congestion worse, but they've already started helping out. They've already sent us you know, recent traffic counts for the whole intersection. So you know, so I think they're on board, and I think they need to stay involved, obviously. And that's the other piece of, you know, if you get the right traffic consultant or the right engineering traffic consultant into this mix of the team, they know how to work the Mass DOT guidelines and standards into the project. You you want to know, you want to work with somebody who knows what they are.
Yeah, and I mean, and it seems like, you know, with the pedestrian safety, you know, with the school campus relatively close by, and the high school kind of having an open campus where kids can come and go. You know, I see a lot of kids, especially when the weather's nice, are at Starbucks, and you know, we've got Bueno Isano now, and Panera, so there's going to be a lot of.
And they're spreading
action.
out to Johnny Rockets, and
exactly.
you know, and that's probably Panera. That's, we haven't talked about that yet either. But when they're coming, it'll be another one.
Yeah. You know, part of the discussion we were having with the Finance Committee last night is that there's certainly some members of the Finance Committee that think we shouldn't be seeking all this money in 1 year. We should maybe do it, you know, phase it over 2 or 3 years. Why is it important to try to do this all at once and get the funding all at once?
Well, I mean, I already mentioned, you know, how this process should work. You know, we need to approach this holistically. We need to approach this with an iterative process with feedback loops. And if you start carving out the process, you know, let's say we do the zoning or the, you know, design guidelines only this year, or we do the visioning for Kelly's Corner this year. If we do the visioning without knowing what the existing conditions are, and what the implications are for how to improve the street network in the Kelly's Corner, and how that ties in with Mass DOT standards, and if you don't know how that works with the business opportunity and the real estate market conditions, then you've just dreamed up something. And we've done that in zoning, and too often that we come up with all these ideas for zoning this and zoning that, and when the reality hits, it was like, well, we didn't think about that, we didn't think about this. And we don't want to repeat that mistake in Kelly's Corner. The other thing that we hear is that, you know, it's too much money, or, you know, the next sentence is, well, it's not enough money, and it's like it's not clear. But I think for those folks who are skeptics, I would say, if we always think, you know, there's a lot of commitment in that I hear that, well, Kelly's Corner, it's really, you know, we need to do something about it. We want to make an effort to make it a better place. And then comes all the list of reasons why it doesn't work, or why it won't work. And because, you know, we don't have Kmart on board, or the owner, or, you know, there's too much water under the ground, and, you know, all of the reasons why it can't work. Well, and therefore, you know, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And the other reason is, and let me mention that, is, you know, we do look at a grant opportunity for, you know, once we're finished with this project, if we get the funding for it, there is in my mind, there is a real opportunity for capturing MassWorks grant funding to actually then implement the public infrastructure improvements at Kelly's Corner. We estimate that they cost about $3 million. Whether we get the $3 million, nobody can guarantee that, but it is worth working towards it. If we sit down now and say, well, this won't work and that won't work, and by the way, Acton will never qualify for that kind of money, then we've relegated ourselves already to minor league, and we'll never get to you know, implementing that vision. My proposition is that we can play with the big boys. You know, we don't have to be a Fall River or a New Bedford or Lowell with a ton of you know, high unemployment rates, lots of infrastructure needs, lots of dilapidated buildings, in order to capture significant grant monies. And the reason why I'm saying this is a lot of those fundings has moved away from the traditional block grant funding that used to be, where that was, you know, if you didn't have a minimum amount of unemployment or a minority population or whatever, you didn't even need to apply. That has changed, and if, you know, I can't speak for the Patrick administration, but I've heard him speak quite often when it comes to promoting programs like this, like MassWorks, or, you know, housing programs. It's about opportunity, and it's about housing. And if we can get that mixture right at Kelly's Corner, I believe then we are also going to capture a significant amount of money for the improvements. And, you know, the state doesn't care whether the improvements are in Lowell or whether they create opportunities in Acton. So I think the thing isn't going to fall into our lap, but I think if we work hard at it, we can play with the big boys, as I said, and I think we should stop thinking we can't. I think we need to think big picture, and I think we need to believe in ourselves that we can accomplish this. So.
And Selectman Clough was mentioning last night at Finance Committee of a development in Belmont on Trapello Road done by Mr. Starr, who's been involved in Acton, and
yes.
He's been able to leverage some public-private dollars, I guess, to do that.
That's
and
right.
Belmont is certainly not
That's
an
right.
impoverished community as well. So.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And there's always a way to leverage things. You just have to, if it's not Mass Works, if Mass Works doesn't cover the entire $3 million estimated cost, and this is very early in the stage. There'll be other ways of playing this. There is, and it may not be something we do all at once. The whole Kelly's Corner vision will not be something that, whatever it will be. It needs to first be worked out in the public process. But whatever it will not be something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 5 years. It's the long-term, 30-year generational outlook that we need to have. And I think in that time frame, there's also time to do infrastructure improvements incrementally if it can't be done all at once. But a lady last night at the planning board meeting kind of said, well, why aren't we courting developers and businesses and industries that we would like to have in Acton? And that's a great idea, and I think that's a lot of communities do that. But if you translate that to Kelly's Corner, and if folks want to see a transition in Kelly's Corner, and particularly focusing on Kmart, there have been people saying that, well, if we don't have the owner of the Kmart property, if we don't know what they were doing, what they're going to be doing, then there's no reason for us to do anything. Or, I'm not sure I get that exactly quoted right, but that's not the point. The point is that Kmart, Stop and Shop, who owns this property, that may not even be on their radar screen right now. It's an important piece for Acton, but for us to wait until Kmart comes around.
Yeah. And it may be that we want to have some dialogue with them as this plan progresses.
It might be good, but but the thing is if we wanted to now bring a developer or a business owner or somebody to Kmart, to Kelly's Corner, and say, here is the area, and we would really like you to develop a project here in this area. I can't offer them an opportunity because the zoning, if you look at the Kmart property, the zoning, basically, the Kmart property is already overbuilt. So I can show them an opportunity where they can build less than what is there now. So that's not a business proposition. And I can show them an infrastructure that is tired and old. And if you want to dish up, somebody an opportunity, if you want to invite people to come and do business here, you want to at least serve it on a plate that doesn't have a bunch of cracks and chips in it. Exactly. And that's where the public infrastructure improvement, in my mind, comes in. So that when a developer comes, I can say, okay, the zoning has these and these opportunities, and we've already worked on the public infrastructure so that they can see, like, oh, here's a sidewalk, and here's this, and here's, here's how you want to blend the front piece of the property into the public realm. I get it. I can put a building there. I can make a nice front that interacts with the street and the pedestrians, and I can put the parking on the side and the back, and over there I can put some residential development overlooking, the pond or whatever, and the woods in the back from the porches. And, and maybe in phase 2, if this all works out well and I'm successful with this, I can put a parking garage in the back of the building, so nobody has to look at it, but it would address the parking need, and we don't have all that sea of pavement in Kelly's Corner. So it's a process that, but I think, starting creating a vision is important, and that vision should be driven by the community. I think Acton is the kind of community that wants to basically have a basic concept in place that tells folks what the vision is, and have that translated in zoning and guidelines, and not the other way around where we say, well, let's talk to Stop and Shop and see what their ideas are for the property. That's just not Acton.
Exactly.
So.
Well, Roland, we're running out of time, so real
Okay.
quickly, I don't know when the show is going to air, so maybe just very quickly talk about the public forum
Yeah.
that's going to be held on March 7th.
Yeah, there is, we have that, a little slide on that too. There's going to be a forum on March 7th at 7:30 in the evening in the town hall in the Faulkner room, in a big meeting room upstairs. And it's basically a forum not about how we transform Kelly's Corner, but it's a showcase of how we would go about the process of doing that if the funding were appropriated at town meeting. We will show how planning processes work, what other communities have done or are in the process of doing, and perhaps we learn some good things and some bad things, and we can make it a better project here.
Okay,
So that's what that is.
Well, thank you, Roland. You know, town meeting, I think we'll have a lively debate about this Kelly's Corner project, and you know, I want to thank you for being on the show and explaining what that's all about. And you know, thank you, and
Thank you
I'd like
for
to
having
thank our viewers, and we'll see you next time on 472 Main.